It all started with a moment that could have turned deadly in the blink of an eye. A young black man, calm and confident, was walking back to his car after visiting his mother's house in a quiet suburban neighborhood. He wasn't doing anything suspicious. He wasn't breaking any laws. He was simply living his life. But in that neighborhood, there was a man who had convinced himself that he was the self-appointed cop of the homeowners association. He carried himself with authority, barked orders at people who didn't look like they belonged, and even dressed the part, dark sunglasses, a utility vest, and a pistol strapped to his side. And on this particular day, that self-proclaimed HOA cop made a decision he would soon regret for the rest of his life. He saw the young black man and immediately jumped to conclusions. Instead of approaching with respect, instead of asking simple questions, he went for intimidation. With his hand resting on his weapon, he demanded to know what the man was doing there. When the young man calmly explained that he was visiting his mother who lived in the neighborhood, the fake cop didn't back down. He escalated. He pulled out his gun and pointed it directly at him. What the so-called HOA cop didn't realize, however, was that the man he had just threatened was no ordinary young man. He wasn't just someone passing through. He wasn't someone who could be easily scared or bullied. He was a highly trained Special Forces veteran, disciplined, strategic, and yes, fully armed. Every instinct in his body could have told him to react, but he had the patience and restraint that only years of training could give. This wasn't just a clash between a resident and an overzealous neighbor. This was a moment where ignorance, arrogance, and racism collided head-on with experience, discipline, and strength. The man pointing the gun thought he held all the power, but in reality, he was standing on the edge of a dangerous cliff he didn't even see coming. Because the Special Forces soldier wasn't just armed with a weapon. He was armed with knowledge, skill, and the kind of mental toughness that made him far more dangerous than this wannabe cop could ever imagine. And as the situation unfolded, one thing became painfully clear. The fake HOA cop had just picked a fight with the wrong man. The story goes back to how this neighborhood had been run for years. Like many communities with HOAs, residents had seen their fair share of petty rules and unnecessary enforcement. But this man, this so-called HOA cop, had taken things much further. He wasn't on the board. He wasn't elected. He wasn't even given authority by anyone. He had simply decided that he was the enforcer of order, and over time, he had gained a reputation for harassing delivery drivers, stopping teenagers walking home, and confronting anyone he didn't think fit in. Neighbors whispered about him. Some ignored his antics, others rolled their eyes, and a few were quietly intimidated. But no one ever seriously challenged him until the day he crossed paths with a Special Forces soldier. The young black man, named Marcus, had recently returned home from deployment overseas. After years of serving his country in hostile environments, he was finally enjoying some peace with his family. His mother lived in the very neighborhood where the HOA cop prowled, and Marcus visited her often to help with groceries, check on her health, and simply spend quality time. On the day of the confrontation, he was doing just that, helping his mother unload bags before heading back to his car. That's when the fake cop spotted him. From across the street, he started shouting, demanding to know who Marcus was and what business he had there. Marcus, used to dealing with aggression in far worse circumstances, simply replied with calmness. He explained that he lived nearby, that his mother's house was right there, and that there was no problem. But instead of de-escalating, the man grew angrier. Neighbors later recalled hearing the sharp tone in the so-called cop's voice. Some peeked through their blinds, already sensing this could spiral out of control. And then, the moment no one could believe actually happened, the fake cop pulled his weapon. He aimed it directly at Marcus, threatening him as though he were some kind of criminal intruder. Marcus froze, not because he was scared, but because he understood the stakes. In his training, he had been in countless situations where one wrong move could cost lives. He knew the importance of timing, patience, and control. He didn't reach for his own weapon, though he legally carried one. He didn't raise his voice. Instead, he fixed his eyes on the man, analyzing every movement, every twitch, every ounce of body language. The so-called cop expected Marcus to panic. He expected compliance born from fear. But instead, Marcus radiated calm authority. He spoke clearly, telling the man to lower his weapon, reminding him that pointing a firearm at someone without cause was a criminal act. His voice carried so much command that for a brief second, the man's hand faltered. What Marcus knew, and what the HOA cop didn't, was that Marcus had more than enough legal right to defend himself. He was armed, yes, but more importantly, he was capable of neutralizing the threat in less than a second. He had been trained in high-stakes combat. He had endured years of preparation where reacting under pressure was second nature. If he had chosen to act, the wannabe cop wouldn't have stood a chance. But Marcus chose restraint. Instead, he kept speaking, warning the man that neighbors were watching, that the police would be called, and that his reckless actions were digging him into a hole he couldn't climb out of. Sure enough, within minutes, several neighbors had dialed 911. And when the real police arrived, the picture became crystal clear. Officers saw a white man pretending to be in some position of power, brandishing a firearm at an innocent black man who turned out to be a decorated soldier. They quickly disarmed him, detained him, and began piecing together what had just happened. The neighbors stepped forward, many of them finally voicing their frustration about his past behavior. This wasn't the first time he had harassed someone, but it was certainly the last time. Marcus gave his statement calmly, never once raising his voice or exaggerating what happened. The officers respected his composure and were shocked when they discovered his military background. They knew immediately that if Marcus had reacted differently, the outcome could have been tragic. The fake HOA cop, on the other hand, was left humiliated. His self-created image of power had crumbled in front of the entire neighborhood. Not only was he facing criminal charges for assault with a deadly weapon, but his reputation was destroyed. No one saw him as an authority anymore. They saw him for what he really was, a reckless bully who played cop until he pointed his gun at the wrong man. For Marcus, the experience was both infuriating and sobering. He had spent years protecting freedom overseas, only to come home and face a gun in his own mother's neighborhood. Yet instead of anger, he felt gratitude that he had the training to stay calm, gratitude that his neighbors stepped up to call for help, and gratitude that no lives were lost that day. The lesson was clear. Power doesn't come from a weapon or a badge someone makes up for themselves. Real power comes from discipline, restraint, and the ability to control a situation without escalating it unnecessarily. And that day, in that suburban neighborhood, one man learned the hard way that pretending to be a cop doesn't make you one. But Marcus, he didn't need to pretend to be powerful. He was powerful in the truest sense of the word.